Hi, I'm Richard Weiss, former president of the Explorers Club, and I'd like to welcome you to the Explorers Club 50 lecture series. If you're new to the club and to the lecture series, I'd like to welcome you and tell you a little about ourselves and also about the Explorers Club 50. First of all, the Explorers Club was established in 1904. At that time, by a bunch of guys trying to get to the North and South Pole. And since that time, our members have covered just about every corner of the earth. In fact, when you walk into the lobby of our historic headquarters on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, there is a plaque on the wall that perhaps summarizes it best. Our members have been the first to step foot on the North Pole, first on the South Pole, first to stand upon Mount Everest, the highest point, the first to go to the lowest point in the ocean, and also our members were the first to go to the moon. Other notable explorers have been Theodore Roosevelt and Jane Goodall, and just about every notable explorer of the 21st century. Now, about the Explorers Club 50. The slogan is 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. And I'll give you a little genesis of how that started. Last spring, during the beginning of the pandemic, one of our members said to me, "You've got to check out this performance or this video called Earthrise by a young poet named Amanda Gorman." I watched it, and it was about the Apollo 8 mission, which were our members. And I was blown away by how she described Earth, the environment, and the fragility of our planet. We started a short correspondence and became pen pals. She became a member. But I also thought, how many other Amanda Gormans are out there in the world? In fact, when I got together with the chair of this program, Joe Rohde, who you'll be meeting in just a few minutes, we got together and we said, how do we want to describe exploration in the future? And if we're truly a global exploration society, then our club has to represent the world as we see it. And not just in terms of how people look, but also how people describe the earth and the sky and just about everything in science. So, how did we choose the EC 50 honorees? 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. The first thing Joe Rohde said to me was that if you take a problem and you approach it with the same people, you are always going to get the same type of result. So he immediately said, we wanted as diverse a judging panel, people who could look at the world through a different narrative and lens and be able to come together with some sort of conclusion. So he put together a group that was from all over the world. The next thing we had to do is have our membership give us people that they have met along the way that were doing incredible things that maybe weren't recognized for their work. We got about 450 nominations. And I have to tell you, they were pretty amazing. We could have gotten an EC 200 out of it. We came out with our top 50 honorees, and the result was nothing less than spectacular. We have people covering all sectors of disciplines from space to paleontology, oceanography. We have Inuit, Native Americans, Sri Lankans, Indians, Africans, and just across the border. So this is the inaugural lecture series, and we'll have a few more that'll be rolling out over the week. But in the meantime, I want you to sit back and enjoy some good old-fashioned storytelling.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of our conversations around the Explorers Club 50. 50 unique individuals who are bringing something special and transformative to the Explorers Club. This episode revolves around the idea of changemakers. And we have three participants in our conversation: Ayana Flewellen, Marc Ó Gríofa, and Binbin Li. We're going to see their presentations on the work that they do, and then we will return and engage in conversation to tease out some deeper ideas.
Hello, everyone. My name is Binbin Li. I'm a conservation scientist from China. Right now, I'm assistant professor at Duku Kunshan University Environmental Research Center. So for me, I have three major research interests. The first one is conservation planning, where we should protect our nature, protect the biodiversity. And then the second is how we can manage these protected areas better, and also to ensure the local communities can develop in a right way so we can have sustainable development around protected areas. And the third area actually is around the sustainable infrastructure, how we can have sustainable and environmental friendly infrastructure such as roads, buildings inside China and also outside China. So I also actively engaged with the Belt and Road Initiative, so trying to promote the Green Belt and Road Initiative outside China. So one of my recent project I would like to tell you more about is Panda. So I also study endangered species and using umbrella species as a way to protect its habitat and also the wildlife coexist in the same area. So as a lot of people may know, panda is an endangered species listed as vulnerable by IUCN. And a lot of people may not know that actually we have a lot more wild pandas than the captive ones. So right now we have about 2,000 wild pandas in China. And China has put a lot of efforts to protect this species, including we have established more than 67 nature reserves to protect this species, covering about 56% of its habitat. However, a lot of people argue whether we have put too much effort in just one single species, would that be a greater harm to other biodiversity or species? And our study had shown that actually by protecting pandas, we're protecting the most important endemic centers for China because 96% of panda range actually cover the endemic centers for forest birds, forest mammals, and forest amphibians. So no matter where we protect, if it is a panda habitat, actually we're protecting other endemic species that are not well known to the public. And it may not be that cute, but actually it is helping to guarantee the integrity of the ecosystem. And there are a lot of threats why panda have like become endangered, including logging, agriculture, mining, roads. However, there is an emerging threat that has become the most prevalent human disturbance across the panda habitat, and that is livestock grazing. And our work have shown that livestock has grazed bamboos as well, especially during winter, and that has caused the degradation and loss of panda habitat. In one of the areas that we study, more than one third of the panda habitat have been degraded or lost. We're not only studying how the livestock grazing impact panda habitat, but also we're trying to understand how they impact other species or taxa groups, such as birds, big mammals using camera traps, small mammals use the small mammal traps, and to understand how the new domestic grazers may change the community composition of the wildlife and how that will change the forest ecosystem. Nonetheless, we can find the problem livestock grazing can become a problem, but also we would like to solve this problem. So some of our research has brought me and also my students into the local communities and to do this household survey to understand why they want to have more livestock and what they would like to have to actually lower the holdings of their livestock, what alternative like livelihood they would like to have. So very interestingly, we figure out there's a lot of different factors influence people's decision why they want to have more livestock. For example, we do not have large predators in most of the forests where we have pandas. So that become a low cost for the local people to have their livestock in the forest because they won't be eaten. And also there's other conservation policies actually contribute to the increase in livestock grazing because they cannot log, they cannot grow crops, and they need to rely on some natural resources to live, and livestock grazing become one of the alternatives. So we give suggestion to the government and we work with them to think about what could be the better policy for this issue. So now we have create jobs and to actually being the ranger, to have the stewardship of the forest for these people who once had livestock, and they also have some composition by selling their livestock. So one of the area right now we're successfully like changing the livelihood from livestock grazing to other methods. And we also want to do it across the panda habitat. And also the other thing is whether we can use market tools to solve this problem. So we're also working with other stakeholders and trying to think whether the limited number of livestock which can be friendly to the environment, but also they can have a higher price to the market and also can give the support of livelihood to the local communities. So this is one of the projects we're working with, and this is one I would like to share because I think this is a relatively complete conservation project. It have the problem why it could have impact on pandas or on the biodiversity or on the habitat. But on the other hand, we also care about the people, especially the local communities who may suffer from the protection or may not benefit directly from the conservation. So we would like to think of the ways that can benefit them and also acknowledge their sacrifice by not using the natural resources as they have traditionally do. I think there's a lot of large policies that we work on and trying to make it happen more easily. For example, the large ecosystem payment services, a payment for ecosystem services. So the money coming from the eastern part of China and going to the western part, where it's not very rich because they have to protect the headwaters of Yangtze River, Yellow River, and Mekong River. And by this way, we are acknowledging and compensating their efforts in conservation. Besides research, I also engage a lot with science communications. So I'm also a nature photographer. I'm also directors for nature documentaries. So we want to use this way to actually show the public why it is very important to protect biodiversity, especially trying to like the protected areas more well known to the public. It's not just a scenic place, but actually they have very important roles in protecting biodiversity. So I think that's all I would like to share with everyone, that what I have been always doing. And I enjoy the days in the field. So right now I'm in the field. I wish I could show you more pictures and videos, but then the internet is not good. So that's it. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Ayana Omilade Flewellen, and I'm a Black feminist, an archaeologist, a storyteller, and an artist. My research and teaching interests are shaped by and speak to Black feminist theory, historical archaeology, maritime heritage conservation, public and community engaged archaeology, processes of identity formation, and representations of slavery in the African diaspora. I've worked in Tanzania, Nevis, the southern United States, and I'm currently the co PI on an archaeology project based in St. Croix, one of 3 US Virgin Islands. Today, I'm going to be sharing a bit about my work with the Society of Black Archaeologists and Diving with a Purpose, two organizations that have teamed up to shift the field of terrestrial and maritime archaeology by coupling conversations of environmental conservation and cultural preservation to create spaces for communities and historically excluded and marginalized populations to play a central role in environmental and cultural stewardship in the present and also for the future. So let's start with the Society of Black Archaeologists, which was co-conceived by my fellow explorer, Dr. Justin Dunafant, and myself in 2011. Since its founding, we have officially become a nonprofit organization with over 300 professional and student members based in the United States, the Caribbean, South America, the UK, and on the continent of Africa, alongside 27 institutional members, including the Society for Historical Archaeology, the Archaeological Institute of America, and the Digital Archaeological Archive of Comparative Slavery. Our mission centers the histories and material cultures of global Black and African communities in archaeological research. By providing a strong network of mentorship and educational access, the SBA works to resolve the ongoing systemic exclusion of Black and African scholars in communities from the field of archaeology. The SBA aims to provide avenues of engagement and training that will prepare Black and African scholars and communities to be active participants in the documentation, excavation, and preservation and interpretation of Black and African heritage. Our mission envisions a field predicated on the practice of anti-racist archaeology. And achieving this begins with the commitment to engage concretely with the long-standing problem of systemic anti-Blackness, examining and unlearning canonized practices rooted in exclusion and harm. Essentially, SBA was co-created to be a home space for archaeologists and communities of African descent. It was designed out of a need that Justin and I had as students at the University of Florida to find a new way to breathe in a suffocating field and to create histories that precipitated the life, not death, of African and African descendant people in the past. Now shifting a little to DWP, Diving with a Purpose. Diving with a Purpose is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the conservation and protection of submerged heritage resources. And I've been one of their board members since 2019, and I've been a lead and I've been an instructor since 2017 and have been diving with them since 2015. We provide education, training, certification, and field experience to adults and youth in the field of maritime archaeology and ocean conservation. We have a special focus in the protection, documentation, and interpretation of African slave shipwrecks and the maritime history and culture of African Americans who formed a core of the labor and expertise for America's maritime enterprises. What makes this organization so unique is how it's comprised predominantly of recreational scuba divers of African descent and has partnered with national and international organizations, gaining professional skills that have afforded us opportunities to aid in the restoration of coral reefs around the world and the documentation of maritime heritage sites associated with oceans and preserving our heritage. The slogan for the organization is restoring our oceans and preserving our heritage. The rhetoric within our slogan invokes a sense of stewardship to the natural and cultural environment, which our members always uphold. DWP divers are environmental stewards of the ocean and cultural stewards to African diaspora maritime heritage sites. Since the organization's founding, we have trained over 300 divers with our PhD certification course in maritime archaeology advocacy, with 46 participants becoming instructors. The organization as a whole has documented 18 shipwrecks, worked in 6 different countries, and logged over 19,000 volunteer hours. DWP offers 3 training opportunities: our Maritime Archaeology Training Program, our Core Reef Restoration Program, and our Youth Diving with a Purpose program. DWP has worked with the National Park Service, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Slave Wrecks Project, aiding in coral reef restoration and the documentation of submerged heritage resources around the world, as well as providing training to divers to carry out the specialized work. For the past 16 years, Diving with a Purpose has offered a week-long maritime advocacy training program to skilled divers, teaching them the basics of maritime archaeology survey. DWP trains experienced divers, including youth, to become underwater archaeology advocates. Through the program, divers are able to assist in the historical documentation and preservation of artifacts and wreck sites. DWP performs extensive underwater archaeology documentation of shipwrecks, surveying their condition, and develops detailed maps of these sites. And the program also attempts to interpret and understand the historical context in which these ships existed. We believe it's important to document these historical sites while they still exist. These sites are subject to an ever-changing environment by storms and time on the ocean floor. The shipwreck data collected serves as a vital educational resource for local communities that will tell the story of these vessels and the role they played in the nation's maritime heritage. Documenting these sites allows a rich history to be shared for generations to come. One of the most progressive aspects of DWP's work, which aligns so perfectly with the mission of SBA, the Society of Black Archaeologists, is how we've managed to carve out a space for ourselves in the field of maritime archaeology. Maritime archaeology historically has been predominantly white and exclusionary towards racial minorities and those of low socioeconomic status. In 1997, Dr. Maria Franklin wrote an article, "Why Are There So Few Black American Archaeologists?" stating that one of the main reasons that African Americans did not participate in the field of archaeology was due to the prohibitive cost of training and education in the field. And Dr. Franklin was talking specifically about the lack of racial diversity in the field of terrestrial archaeology. However, maritime archaeology lags far behind terrestrial archaeology in regards to racial and class diversity among its practitioners, as well as community collaborative practices within research. Diving with a Purpose in partnership with SBA has created pathways for stakeholder community members around the world to become trained cultural stewards of their submerged cultural resources, while also training formally educated terrestrial archaeologists of African descent to do maritime archaeology. DWP's training programs really are an active redress, accounting for the disparities in access to formal and informal education in maritime archaeology and advocacy for people of color. These training opportunities have provided avenues for Black and Brown populations to gain entry into a field where traditional pathways are foreclosed to them. More importantly, our work sows the seeds of a new sense of societal stewardship of our oceans and submerged cultural heritage, doing the work our institutions often fail to do in communities. I'm really looking forward to participating in this conversation with other scholars who are doing fantastic work, really changing and shifting our relationship to the environment and our past. Thank you.
My name is Dr. Marc Ó Gríofa. I am a physician, an engineer, an aquanaut, and an explorer. I've been lucky enough to work alongside some of the best teams in the world doing what they do, and everything ranging from spaceflight to underwater exploration and technology development. At the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was tasked by the city of Las Vegas to establish the country's largest field hospital called the ISOQ. This 500-bed field hospital was designed to provide care, testing, and oversight of the homeless population of the city. We ran this facility for about 100 days, seeing several hundred patients. From then, I transitioned on to overseeing medical respite for the homeless population of the city. We have a combination of medical, nursing, and paramedic teams, and I've managed to create a nexus of healthcare for the homeless population of the city with outreach into both the tunnels, the encampments, and following on from that, providing vaccination efforts citywide for the homeless population. I'm also a tactical physician for the Las Vegas Metro SWAT team. At nighttime, we're providing medical support in the stack for both counterterrorism, hostage rescue, and direct action missions citywide, ensuring that we're providing umpteen levels of medical care and trauma support to the busiest SWAT team in the United States. I'm also president of the board for Red Rock Search and Rescue. This is one of the largest all-volunteer search and rescue teams in the United States. We have about 200 volunteers who are out multiple times per week. We conduct about 150 missions per year, ranging from rural, extreme wilderness rescue missions in Red Rock and urban missions for missing persons with Metro in the city of Las Vegas. I also teach and train combat medicine for special forces units, ranging from SEAL teams, Green Berets, and Ranger teams, in conjunction with North American Rescue. We teach and train these teams to combine their medicine with their tactics before they deploy downrange. These teams, as we transition from Afghanistan and Iraq into Africa, are now being tasked to ensure that they are able to maintain a medical proficiency to provide care for critical casualties for up to 48 hours in the most austere conditions. This track of medicine, known as prolonged field care, combines oftentimes some of the most critically injured patients, ranging from the 4 horsemen of prolonged field care, which is severe TBI, sepsis, burns, and crush, combined with catastrophic hemorrhage and multimodal trauma. In addition, I am also an expedition physician for the Team 5 Foundation. This foundation provides medical care worldwide for a range of medical scenarios, including but not limited to natural disasters, and providing medical care for indigenous peoples in different areas around the world, which are so remote that sometimes they never receive Western medical care. I recently became the medical director for the Aquarius undersea habitat. This is the world's only underwater research laboratory, providing both a platform for saturation diving, NASA astronauts, the US Navy, and allows teams to go and experience saturation, test new equipment, and conduct research on the sea floor that would not otherwise be available. I'm also the dive medicine lead for World Extreme Medicine. This is our class photo from the inaugural group of docs that actually trained at the Aquarius reef base alongside their medical team and also spent the night in the Aquarius undersea habitat. World Extreme Medicine is a collection of some of the most extreme physicians and medics around the world, providing medical care for both expeditions in some of the most austere settings worldwide. My research base is anchored around Project Casper, which was the first Irish experiment to fly on board Space Station and Space Shuttle in 2006. This research is based around using a single lead EKG or ECG to monitor sleep disruption and disturbance of astronauts. It was flown as part of the ESA Long Duration Astrolab mission, and the astronaut was Tomas Ryder. I then transitioned to work at Kennedy Space Center for 3 years. I provided medical support as part of the trauma triage team for the last 15 space shuttle missions. I was a part of the aerospace medicine department and the medical bioengineering department. While I was there, I also got a doctorate in biomedical engineering, which continued on to be able to provide research in a variety of different austere environments around the world. I'm also in-flight support for the Zero G Corporation. We provide training for astronauts, introduction to microgravity, and conduct research with various research institutions around the United States and around the world in preparation for experiments getting ready to either fly on the International Space Station or future spaceflight opportunities. For the last 10 years, I've been lucky enough to be a part of the NASA NEEMO program. NEEMO is NASA's Extreme Environment Mission Operations, which is their premier analog, which is used for the development of new tools, techniques, technologies for the next generation of spaceflight, and is also used as a commander upgrade program for astronauts getting sometimes ready to command the International Space Station. In 2016, I was lucky enough to be a part of the Saturation NEEMO 21 crew. This crew was comprised of 3 astronauts and 3 scientists. The research done on this groundbreaking mission comprised of research both inside the habitat and outside. A good example would be the first sequencing of DNA on the sea floor. This was also done to troubleshoot the sequence and procedure that was used by Kate Rubins on board the International Space Station 3 months later. In addition, we also planted the world's deepest coral nursery. This is enabled by being able to dive the Kirby Morgan stainless steel helmets with 1,000-foot umbilicals, which actually gives us unlimited bottom times. In addition, we also use the coral reef as an analog for exogeology. We have a full mission support team on the shore, helping us to identify corals and then development and testing of new tools and technologies, which could then be used on the surface of the Moon or surface of Mars to actually go and collect geology samples from different extraterrestrial environments. One of the reasons that NEEMO is such a good analog for spaceflight that once you are down there for 24 hours, the body actually goes into saturation, which means all of the body's tissues are saturated with nitrogen. To return to the surface, you must go through a 15-hour decompression on the seafloor in the habitat. This window actually mimics the emergency descent timeline of what it would take to return from the International Space Station in case of a contingency. I've been lucky enough to work alongside some of the best teams in the world, have several once-in-a-lifetime experiences, and I am proud to be one of the Explorers Club 50 and to be named one of the changemakers in science, medicine, and research to help push these exploration efforts forwards.
First, welcome everybody. It's really an honor to have you here. This is just such an exciting time in the history of the club, and it's really wonderful to be able to have these conversations. I often start by thinking about this word explore, the word itself, which comes from Latin, and it refers to a person back in the day, long ago, who would go out ahead of everybody else into the bush, into the country, across the river, and yell back. That's the P-L-O-R part, explore, implore, deplore, yell back, what's out here? What is there? And it calls attention to the fact that exploration as much has to do with speaking out as it does with observing. And so each of you, of course, have really unique voices. And I was wondering if we'd start by what it means to you to speak out as an explorer. And I'm going to start with you, Binbin.
I think it's a really good question, how to speak out. Because in Chinese saying, it's actions better than words. So for a lot of Chinese people, even for me, it's like you need to take actions, do things, and maybe do not need to say too much about what they are doing, what you have accomplished. However, one thing changed my mind is when I decided to come back to China from the States after I finished my PhD, I wrote an article which is published online, but just like using my personal account. Basically, is to review what I have been accomplished, but also acknowledge that I never thought I could do things in conservation, which requires a lot of field work. Because when I first started, a lot of people just told me, like, girls are not suitable for field work because you cannot, like, stand the hardship, like in the field work, and you cannot walk fast or long enough compared to guys. You cannot take a lot of weights. And there's a lot of things not convenient for girls in the field. So at first I thought like I would not be able to do it. But then somehow I lucky and met a lot of good person. They encouraged me. So I began to dive into this area as a scientist. However, when I graduated, I wrote this article reviewing like girls can do something. There's a lot of replies mentioning a lot of girls right now still have the similar problems. A lot of people told them they cannot do things and they cannot be in certain areas, like be the pioneers. So then I understand it is actually good to speak out what you have already done, what they are doing, what you are trying to do, because it's not just like showing it's possible, but also giving some hope to other people, because they see, okay, it's happening. It happens to a person. It's a female, it's young, and then it is happening. So actually showing what is happening in certain areas, I think the hope is really important. And I think that is like light at night for a lot of person, because the possibility is really important. So it's similar to where in the field, if someone show a flag just in the wilderness, and we say, oh, someone has been here. It's a way, or there's a direction I can follow. There's a way out, and that will give you hope to continue. So I think to speak out is really important, not just for yourself, but for the people who are trying to come along.
Ayana, I'd love to hear your point of view on this, the speaking out part of exploration.
Being an archaeologist that does both terrestrial work and underwater work with SBA and diving with a purpose, speaking out is very integral to our field. And the speaking out part really resonates deeply with me because there's a way that speaking out means literally speaking out about the very sort of messy, complex, diverse histories that we have in this world that not only shape how people come to see themselves and come to see others in this very present moment, which feels so charged around everything that makes us different and also everything that makes us the same. And it also has a lot to do with what it means and how we're going to envision our future. So doing this work of like digging in the ground, doing this work of like shifting sand underwater, all of that is a kind of excavation that's speaking out about everything that's happened in our past that makes us who we are right now, but also the ways in which, even with that, the shadows of our past, as well as the light, can really shape what our futures are becoming.
And Marc?
As all these explorers know, exploration is difficult. It is arduous. And there's an awful lot of blood, sweat, and tears. I would often tell people, like, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But more so, nowadays, we have students, young people, that see these components, but for so many different aspects of exploration, we also have these components of science, of medicine and technology that goes into our exploration efforts. So one of the big things that I try and do is make sure that these exploration efforts, these missions, be it above water, be it underwater, be it spaceflight or anything else, that we try and go and communicate these aspects of STEM. I'm a huge proponent of using these aspects of kind of exploration, of making sure that they become an inspiration for the next generation of explorers. So using these components of trying to explain to students that exploration, science, and technology are not the pages on a textbook. These are not things that somebody else has done. These are the things that drive us, that allow us to breathe underwater, that allow us to travel to some of the furthest corners of the earth and make sure that these articles of exploration, these scientific discoveries, that these are things that these students can do, that they can be a part of. And if that means imparting some component of the excitement that we've done on our expeditions and making sure that they understand that this is how you get here. This is the next step. You could be this explorer, making sure that you're doing your own discoveries kind of in time and years to come, but making sure that they're also inspired and excited about all of the components of the science and the technology that actually goes into that exploration effort.
I am very interested in this whole way in which adding voices to a conversation changes not just the conversation, it changes the people in the conversation. It's the whole goal for the Explorers Club of doing what we're doing is not just to bring people in, but by bringing people in to change what it is, to really make change. Which does, I mean, it brings me around to this theme of change and Changemakers, which is sort of the title of this piece. And I'm curious, each of you, like, if you just a quick thought on what it is that needs to change. And I'm going to go in reverse order now. So I'll start with you, Marc.
The change component, I don't necessarily see as change. I see as disruption. And there's that old phrase of kind of the old US test pilots, when they talk about pushing the outside of the edge of the envelope. And I think all of our exploration efforts do some component of that. These discoveries are supposed to help shape not only what our future looks like, but also tells us our past, tells us our story, tells us our culture and our heritage. Knowing where we came from, knowing where everybody's people came from is so much a component of the exploration effort. And kind of oftentimes when I talk to students, I deal in spaceflight and I've had worked on components of the space program. Students will often ask, especially younger students, like, have you seen an alien? Especially being from Las Vegas, And you have Area 51 in Groom Lake out in the desert, and they want to know, like, are there aliens? Have you seen aliens? What does that look like? And it really becomes, when we talk about exploration efforts and you talk about the change that had occurred, we now have vehicles, we have rovers on other planets and on Mars. And one of the biggest components becomes our past looking towards our futures. Are we special? Like, are we the only species here on the planet? Like, as we look towards exploration, one of the most profound discoveries that will ever occur is that if one of these rovers hits gold and finds some component of bacteria or even some kind of microbe on another planet, what that effectively means is life can develop, life can survive, life can come to be somewhere else that doesn't require the special ingredients that are here on Earth. So all of these components, no matter what the exploration is, no matter what the discovery is going to be, when that discovery happens, in many cases, that change that occurs afterwards is life-altering and can change the trajectory of that person, but also can change the trajectory of a species, a story, a people, a culture, because those components of our past really do shape our future going forwards.
And Ayana?
For me, when I think about change, I think about what it means to add to the history of this world and also to change the faces of who's doing that work, and what it means to add these voices to this conversation and this ever-growing dialogue. And like what Marc and Binbin are discussing, the addition of voices, the addition of people's lived experiences, their embodied knowledge, means that we get a much richer past, a more full and holistic present. And as Marc is stating, it really creates the possibilities for our future and who we envision in that future. And who we envision is telling the stories and writing down our stories in that future. So that's really the kind of change that I'm seeking. It's like, how are we shifting our past? How are we shifting who's sharing that past? And the importance of that to really provide students, particularly historically excluded students, historically underrepresented students, to really know that they have a stake in this and that they are here in the present, are valued in the present, and that we are living in the future.
And Binbin, what needs to change?
As I'm dealing with biodiversity conservation, and then the most important thing is how we can stop the extinction of different species. And when we look at what we can do to make a change, actually the root cause is the demand from the human society. So when I think about what we can do, it's always come back to the same change is how we value what is a decent life. Is that based on consumption, a lot of consumption? Is that by a lot of luxury bags, cars, houses, phones, and driven by capitalism to let us to buy more? And it's because the peers give you pressure, what is good, what is a good status in the society. And it is always marked by money, by the uniform standard. So actually it's to giving a wide range of criteria to the young generation. You can still be a decent person while you do not have a lot of money, because you can make a change and you actually respect the nature. And we understand actually to be a good person, you do not need to buy a good car to be a good person. So actually is to think about what our happiness and good economy should be. It should be sustainable. And whether development really means the increase of GDP, actually is to think the change of our value system. So that is the change I really want to make, and for a lot of people to rethink about that.
In one of our other conversations, one of the participants brought up this idea. This is more for Ayana and Binbin, although I think, Marc, you'll certainly be able to weigh in on this. It's a word thing. The word conservation leads us to the idea of resources. And the word resources leads us to the word of extraction and value in a way that suggests that nature is an entity that has to pay rent to commerce on its own existence through resources. So I'm interested in each of you and how you think about nature, the world, and its relationship to us. I'm interested in your reaction to this idea that nature has been spoken about in a way, conservation has been spoken about in a way that feeds back into the idea of commercial value rather than intrinsic absolute value that is existential. And I'm going to start with Marc.
One of the biggest things, I think, when we look at exploration efforts, the expeditions that we've all been on, the kind of amazing feats that some of these explorers have done, is you realize, number one, just how incredible this planet is. We've been lucky enough to get a bird's eye view of some of the most incredible places in the world. But what you also begin to realize is just how fragile this tiny blue dot that we all live on is. And I think the exploration component, the exploration gene, the expeditions that we're all lucky enough to be a part of really reinforces to you how fragile the planet is, but how lucky we are to be able to go and do that. But what it also means is you begin to realize with a certain amount of gravity, as you said, that conservation has a price. Nature is paying a price every day. And those components of people around the world, especially kind of as Binbin kind of said, it's taken for granted. One of the components of one of the expeditions that I was on, the NASA NEMO mission, we used the coral reef as an analog for exogeology. So we went, and as part of that mission, we went and planted the world's deepest coral nursery. And the entire component was to try and use a component of an exploration mission to develop or create and look at the variety of genetic coral that could then go and be transplanted somewhere else on the coral reef. And kind of a few years ago, it became very apparent. I was in Australia and dove the Great Barrier Reef. And one of the most heartbreaking signs was to go underwater and just see this sea of dead coral, literally as far as the eye can see. You've one of the greatest natural wonders of what I consider of the world underwater, and it's now just a sea of dead coral. Unfortunately, that was in part caused by not only components of climate change, but also components, that human component of divers going underwater, not being careful, of just years and years. So you have this body of explorers, quote unquote, of divers that have been underwater that didn't do their due diligence. And unfortunately, taking that for granted, it took a cost. And I think looking forward of making sure that for all explorers, taking that component of knowing the conservation, nature has paid a price. If we do our due diligence moving forwards as explorers with these exploration efforts, taking that conservation and nature into account for that, making sure that there is a price being paid, but making sure that the price isn't arduous, but it's built into the cost of whatever we're doing, not only for ourselves, but for the messaging, making sure that we talk about exploring, we talk about having that voice. I think that component of our voice and exploration moving forwards is absolutely key.
Ayana?
I am looking and thinking about the words that Binbin shared earlier to her initial response to the previous question. And I'm really sitting in the understanding that as a human race, we have to develop a different relationship to the world around us, right? So earlier this week, I was on this fantastic panel put on by the National Marine Sanctuary that was talking about Black and Indigenous knowledge and how that comes to shape how we actually come to steward the land that we call Earth, that we call home. And that different relationship, that it's not that there are ways in which people who have for centuries been living on this earth have envisioned a different relationship to the ground and land that was fruitful, nourishing for both the land itself and for humans. And what does it look like to develop a different kind of relationship that is not extractive, but in balance and equilibrium? And I go back to Binbin sharing about, what it means to shift our value systems. It really comes down to that. So the work that SBA is doing, the work that DWP is doing, is really at the interstices of both environmental conservation and cultural heritage preservation, understanding that those two exist in co-balance with each other. When you think about submerged ships, especially those that DWP are interested in, involved in the transatlantic slave trade, you're also thinking about the years, centuries often, of life that have built up around these spaces. And if you think about that work on land throughout the transatlantic slave trade, especially if you're in the Caribbean, you'll notice that a number of historic buildings are actually made from mined coral. And that mined coral has had a devastating effect on heating of our oceans, on climate change that has produced stronger and stronger hurricanes that have just completely eroded coastal lands. So there are ways in which we are always in conversation with the world around us, and we have to develop a different relationship. We have to actually steep ourselves in the understanding that we are of this earth, not to actually extract from it, but to be a part of it. And if we actually can develop an understanding in our societies of environmental stewardship, of cultural stewardship, of people actually believing and knowing that they are of the Great Barrier Reef, and when it dies, we do as well. And it's the same thing, like, as someone who has been diving with DWP for years and have also seen coral reefs along the Florida Keys drastically die from stony coral disease, the ways in which we have to actually understand as humans that when, as Binbin's research shows, when species go extinct, parts of us that are still here and living are also dying with it. And I think if we can develop that kind of relationship, there might be a greater investment when we see how our world is like struggling right now, that we might actually feel that as well and be called to change.
And Binbin Li.
So while talking about indigenous people right now, I'm in the indigenous community doing household survey. One thing we ask them is, how much have you put to raise a kid? So we help them to calculate how much they have put to raise a kid. But when you think about this question, the kids love their parents. Is that because they put a lot of money on them? No, I think it's the connection. So I think one reason right now we're not doing well balancing conservation and development is a lot of us actually lose connection with the nature. And for our generation, especially, like, for example, at least in China, a lot of kids are raised in urban areas. They never got a lot of chances to get connected with the nature, understand the beauty, understand how powerful the nature is. They think human society can conquer anything. They can survive on their own. But actually from the COVID, you can see how just a small, mild virus can destroy like the balance and development of human society. So I think while a lot of people trying to talk about, for example, ecosystem services, trying to put a value on that, it's because people feel like talking about connection to some people is not useful because they do not have a connection at all. All their system is in monetary value. So then you have to put a value for these services and to persuade them they need to protect them. However, I think the real thing we need to do, especially for young people, for the next generation, is to rebuild this connection with the nature. And that is a lot of the explorers right now have done right now, is to bring people on board with their exploration, with their expedition, and then provide more chances for them to go out, actually immerse in the nature to understand it. And then we can establish respect, love, and connection. So I think it's a time even for urban area to mention about urban ecology, to actually bring nature closer to us instead of just saying, okay, nature is one thing, human is another thing. And that way we basically just put a barrier between us and then nature.
I'm going to shift gears for a minute to another entire theme. It's one of the things we tend to want to ask everybody on each of the show, and that is to describe a day not exactly a typical day, but kind of like an archetypical day, a good day that describes what it is. So I'm going to start with you, Binbin, like a day that if you told me about that day, I would understand, oh, I get it. I see what it all is for you and your work.
So I usually wake up around like 6:30, and then we cook breakfast together, and then we pack for lunch. So we usually bring a lot of stuff, but just basic Chinese bread, some peanuts, and then we go into the mountains. So right now I'm in the panda habitat, which is very hard to work because it has very steep terrain. It rains a lot and snow a lot, and especially it have very dense bamboo forest. So you have to swim in the bamboos to push yourself through the bamboo forest. And then you're trying to find the panda poops because that's the sign of their presence. And it's really hard to see a panda because I haven't seen them for about 9 years. I only saw them once, like while I'm researching on what pandas. And then we usually go up to the top of the mountain, enjoy our lunch. And then if we decide just to do a day work, and then we'll come back, and then we'll pick up some mushrooms and then wild herbs for our dinner. And then when we come back, and usually in the mountains, the local people will say it's too wet. So you need a glass of hot liquor, and then the drinking begins. And then people talk about what's going on for today and then plan for the next day.
That sounds great. And I have been up in the Qinling Mountains. It is really extreme, really. Yeah, years ago on a expedition with Conservation International. It is quite extraordinary. Yeah. So Ayana, a day that encapsulates what it is.
So I'm thinking about our diving with a purpose, sort of our trainings that we do each year. And maybe instead of the first sort of days of the week, I'll go like to the midday when we're actually in the water diving and we're having the most fun. And that training, it's done in partnership with NOAA, and we have a group of fantastic scuba divers who are oftentimes recreational scuba divers who are drawn to dive with a purpose. And at this point in the training, we've all done our on-land sort of training with our potential, maritime advocates. And we're going to get in the water for the first time and really look at a wreck site and document not only the wreck itself, but also the oceanic environment around it. So we're also thinking about what coral are growing in this space, what fish species are calling this space home. We're really doing that, like I mentioned, that nexus and intersection of cultural and environmental work. And for many, it's the first time that they're actually diving underwater and not just being asked to look at the beauty around them, right? So for many of us who go diving in like beautiful places, if it's like Malaysia, the Maldives, throughout the Caribbean, you go down, if you're great, if you're lucky, you do like a drift dive and all you literally have to do is like stand still. And in this particular setting, sometimes the current can be really rough, but for many of them, it's the first time that they actually have to carry all their gear with them, be more conscious than typically recreational scuba divers are trained to actually not, as Marc pointed out, drag your feet on the floor. You have to really be cautious of the coral reef. We're not supposed to, and train folks not to touch the coral itself, and also not to touch the wreck itself. So it also requires a lot of like buoyancy with your breath. So there's a lot of excitement that you witness from people, and also a lot of anxiety and nervousness as well. But once you're underwater, it's completely serene. And there's a way that like you understand that the task at hand, if it's the first dive and we're just doing a sort of survey of the wreck or a mud map of the wreck, or we're going down on the second dive to actually start documenting, there's like an understanding of like, okay, we have this time commitment, right? Like we have this time set, and we also have like what we need to get the work done. And you're not down there by yourself. You're down there with a team. You're down there with your buddy. Like there's a way that it's very communal, both on land and underwater. And then like, as Binbin said, you know, we come back up, we do our surface interval, we're eating lunch together, we're chatting about what we found underwater, but we're also chatting about the sort of experiences that so many people from around the different parts of the country and different parts of the world who have descended to do this work, we all get to chat with one another about like what our lives are. And there are ways that I have met people I would ordinarily have never met because we're just in different silos in the world. And then we go back down, we do it all over again. We come back up exhausted and hungry. There's a communal dinner at the end. There's always wine available as well to just sort of decompress with each other. And we chat about, you know, what it means to do this work. And as I mentioned, because for so many of our trainees, it's the first time that they've been introduced to this kind of work, you also get to witness over that training period, the shift that we're calling in for this transition to like, you are a steward of this space. And then what it means, especially in our organization, to then ask that all of our trainees go out and also give presentations to their dive clubs to share this kind of knowledge, to still like create and continue the rippling of that stewardship piece. That's something that you just witness, you know, days and days after.
And Marc, so a day that, if you describe this day, people would understand, oh, I see what it's all like.
Like Ayana talks about kind of being underwater and the diving component, and I couldn't agree more. There's something serene about the water, about being underwater, just changes your entire perspective. One of the missions that I've been involved with for over 10 years at this stage is NASA's NEMO mission. And so Florida International University, used to be owned by NOAA, has an underwater research station down off the Florida Keys called Aquarius, on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean in the National Marine Sanctuary. And what we do is we use this underwater habitat, this underwater research laboratory, as an analog mission, getting astronauts ready to kind of go to the International Space Station, use it as a commander upgrade program for those astronauts getting ready to command the International Space Station, and then use it for the development of new tools, techniques, technologies for the next generation of spaceflight. I've been lucky enough to be medical support, dive support, science support, and then a couple of years ago, a crew member on board one of these missions. And effectively, you're living on the floor of the ocean with 5 other people, generally 4 aquanauts and then 2 dive techs that effectively help run the habitat. And you're waking up in this little capsule on the floor of the Atlantic Ocean at 6 o'clock. You get out and you get out from your bunk. There's 3 bunks either side, and there's a viewport. So you're literally waking up underwater, going, getting breakfast, sitting at the galley, looking outside. And the fact that it's in a national marine sanctuary means that these massive grouper of fish that would otherwise be caught elsewhere realize that this is a sanctuary for them. And then after that, so it's divided up into basically 3 or 4 large components. You have the bunk area, you have the galley, the living area, then you have the science lock, and then you have the wet lock. And if you think about it, the air pressure inside the habitat itself is equivalent to the water pressure outside, which means that to get in and out of the water, you have effectively this moon pool. So we generally go and spend hours per day diving, and rather than using scuba, we use a Kirby Morgan stainless steel. So we go and put on these massive diving helmets, go and suit up, and effectively prepare to do effectively a 6-hour dive on the floor of the ocean with these 1,000-foot long umbilicals. And to go out from the moon pool and to weigh yourself down and to literally hop down 15 feet from a ledge onto the sea floor and literally start to traverse, kind of fulfilling this component of exploration. And as I mentioned before, using the coral reef as an analog for exogeology, and then implementing, so one of the big things that we'll do is while we're on the sea floor, we'll implement a time delay, the same time delay that you might get on the surface of another planet. So using these tools, these techniques, we also have a mission control on the shoreline of a team of scientists to try and effectively replicate this. And one of the biggest components and one of the most exciting components for me was this project that we did with the coral reef of planting this coral nursery and effectively using these as tools to create this analog of developing process and procedures for the next generation of spaceflight that may sometimes be used on the surface of another planet, while also doing some really, really important work here of conservation for our own little blue dot. Then coming back in, finishing the dive, you have kind of your science on the outside of the habitat and then the science on the inside of the habitat. And one of the things that we generally use is a tool called Playbook. And it's basically a timeline for the entire day. Every single 5-minute gap of your day is filled by a task. Every 5 minutes is accounted for. And you have this little red line that's effectively moving throughout the day. And you're trying to make sure that your task list and your completion list matches that little red line. But if the little red line moves and you're stuck because the laptop didn't power up, because you couldn't find something, because some component of the widget, of the doodah, of some piece of your experiment that you're trying to put together, you can't find, that line didn't care. And I didn't realize until we were in the middle of doing this mission that how stressful that little red line was, because this isn't your science. You have 20 experiments from different scientific teams who have put probably 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to possibly 5 years worth of work into this. And they're expecting you to fulfill the science to make sure that the science gets done. And God forbid that little red line starts moving. It doesn't care whether or not you're done. And that component of pressure and stress to go and make sure that you get results as part of the scientific endeavor, the exploration component is something that really hammered home. And there was one day I mentioned to my commander, who was astronaut Reed Wiseman, who had been on the International Space Station. I was like, this is a little stressful. Like, I'm feeling the pressure of trying to go and get these results. And we're in this kind of incredible habitat on the sea floor. And he's like, listen, I'll tell you a little secret. He says, my very first week in the space station, he's like, was stressful as all hell. He says, it's task overload. You're trying to go and accomplish all of these things. And that kind of resonated with me. And then later on that day, you'll sit down, and to be able to sit down and eat dinner and look out the viewport of just fish swimming past and realizing that you have this incredible opportunity to be able to participate in some of what I consider some of the most groundbreaking science and be able to contribute to that. And then nighttime, as the sun goes down and you have kind of the nighttime sea life come out, of just an incredibly humbling experience to be able to go and work alongside some of the best teams in the world, both the aquanauts, the support team, the divers, and all of those components, and be able to go and participate and contribute to that. It's something I'll never forget.
We, the Explorers Club, we're trying to pull these people together. We're trying to recombine the alchemy of the club, the chemistry of the club, to change it, to direct it, to infuse it with all these sort of new viewpoints and distant viewpoints. And in some cases, some of the people who are recipients of this award are artists like myself. I'm basically an artist, a designer. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a scientist. And I'm not even a particularly physical explorer, cultural explorer. So I'm curious about, and I can use the word hope, wish, intention. How would you like to see this relationship play out? And I'll start with Ayana.
When I hear your words about, what does it mean to do this work, and especially for this club to be filled not only with folks who are doing the sort of, when it comes to mind of Explore, the sort of physicality of it, the diving underwater, the moving through and hiking through forest. I think about the ways in which the arts are so integral to the work that we're doing, to this understanding of like embodied knowledge. And I think about the arts more specifically as the actual entryway into making this work legible to the public, and how so much of what we do, especially as scientists and folks who are doing work in harder sort of STEM fields, oftentimes the people that we're in conversation with are the other scientists around us, right? The other granting agencies around us, the institutions that are funding our work. And what I've come to find is that it's oftentimes the artist who I'm in conversation with who really make this work more digestible to the public. So I think about the connections that DWP and SBA, the work we're trying to do right now around science communication more specifically, and what it means to actually connect the public to this work, once again, thinking about what it means to cultivate cultural stewardship and the new sort of avenues we have to create around it, because the same old like dreary lecture documentary is not gonna cut it anymore. Like we have to get people in the water. We have to get people with their hands in the dirt in many ways. How do you do that on a massive scale? Oftentimes, like folks who are artists who are doing like installation pieces, artists who are able to transform our work into poetry, like that sort of like entryway shifts how people are coming to consume the work that we're doing, but also how they're coming to be deeply invested in it. So I think about these words, like I think about hope, I think about change, I think about the ways in which we have to really think through how we can make the words that are inspirational to us be verbs that have a do behind it. So how do you actually move through hope? How are you called to change? How are you called to do a something, right? How are you called to actually experience when, as Marc said, you hear about the Great Barrier Reef, that you're called into doing something about it, that there is something to be done that's pulled out of you. And I think, you know, science communication is central to that, but also, as I mentioned, the arts make it possible.
Binbin.
Yeah, I actually totally agree with Ayana because especially as scientists, like numbers, journal articles won't work for the public. And even for us, we find out there's a lot of livestock because people want meat and we actually have overgrazing in the forest. And we show that 1/3 of the panda habitat actually have been degraded or lost because of livestock grazing in our study area. But 1/3, it's just a number. People will not remember it, will not be moved by it. However, while we're showing the pictures and people can see it directly and visualize it, and they can be impressed. So besides I'm a scientist, I'm also a nature photographer. I'm also directors for documentaries because I think like the moments that impress me is not numbers. It's just like the visualized thing that I feel like, okay, this moment, the sunlight, I really love it. I really be touched by it. So I want to show it to the public. And especially I remember there is a finding actually showing that the bad news can impress people, but will not make them to make a change for their actions. So you need to end up with a positive message, and the positive message actually can motivate people to act. So I think this is really important for us, no matter for science communication, through documentaries, through science articles, through the popular science articles, is to show a way for people can participate and also make a change. So I think a lot of things we're trying to do right now is to find a way to engage the public. And for example, we engage the people in the urban areas to actually survey their buildings, whether there's bird collisions on their windows, on their buildings. They may not find a lot of time to come with us deep into the mountains, spend a week or 10 days or even a month here, but then they can spend like 1 hour around their building to do something. And then they feel like they can be useful and actually not just to read articles or watch these documentaries. And besides this, they can do something to help. So I think this is really important for a lot of us to provide opportunities for others to come along.
And Marc.
So one of the, I think, most important aspects of exploration is that it serves as a vehicle for inspiration. To be able to go and to explore and to be able to use that message and that voice. I'll often tell kind of anybody, but especially students, there's no such thing as can't, only won't. And you have these two incredible female explorers alongside me on this panel, and we have numerous examples becoming more and more people of color, minorities that are doing these groundbreaking feats. And I think what it does is to serve as a message to be able to tell people that they can. But to do it, you must do. There must be action. And I think one of the most important things, and I think a shift that I hope we're going to see going forwards, is this call to action. that either for conservation, be it for inspiration, be it for education, that the voices that we can use and the platform that we can develop as a result of these feats of exploration, I think are going to become more and more incredibly important. And I think to be able to go and emphasize, to be able to say, we cannot take this for granted. And as kind of, as you mentioned, Joe, like I'll often tell people, like there is no such as you make your own luck. None of these expeditions happened by accident. None of these feats occurred because somebody kind of fell into it. It took hours, in some cases, weeks, months of years of effort to be able to go and make sure that these incredible journeys happened. And kind of as Binbin kind of highlighted, our planet is fragile. We have these species that once they're gone, they're gone. And as Ayana said, like once a species goes extinct, there's some part of us that we lose along with that. And to make sure that these incredible journeys that we're listening to as we move forwards, that we do use them as a roadmap for inspiration for the next generation, and to make sure that mistakes that we've made as a planet, as a people, as a culture, on so many aspects, not just exploration, but where we have come from, that we don't repeat those mistakes going forwards. And we make sure that these future feats of exploration learn from those lessons of the past and make sure we become better as a result.
You will often hear it spoken that we are entering an era called the Anthropocene, the era in which humans define the nature of the world. I'm going to start with Ayana, because as an archaeologist of the specific subject that you are an archaeologist of, as a storyteller of the specific subject that you are a storyteller of, the notion of an Anthropocene itself is challenging to contemplate. And yet, there are so many stories of strength in adversity, of surviving in the face of adversity, which is frankly what the Anthropocene proposes. So I wanted to go to you first. As if there is to be an Anthropocene, who are we in it?
I think for me, what I love about this conversation around the Anthropocene is the understanding that humans have begun to drastically shape the way in which the world functions, right? And how our humanity, like the presence of us and the ways in which we have expanded as a species, has begun to dictate the future of this planet, right? So that is a great deal of responsibility, right? Being able to actually do the work that dictates the technological advancements that have made this space and our existence possible. And it's not even just the relationship itself with the earth, right? And with natural resources, but then also the ways in which our relationship with each other as other humans have also began to drastically shape every aspect of the world that we're on. It's the studying of these different facets, the nuances of it, that are with like the heavy weight in knowing that what we're doing as a species impacts this entire world, right? I think about like what the sort of next era would be, and I'm looking at Marc with the work that he's doing, especially around training astronauts, when it becomes like the space in which the human race is impacting our solar system, right? Like there's a way in which we're not there yet, but we're at this space of understanding at a planetary level, the actions that we take right now will impact every aspect of this world, right? It's a lot of responsibility to not only do the storytelling of how that shift occurred in the past, but also understanding that it's important right now. Like understanding that past matters right now. And it matters because we have to make sure we're alive in the future, you know? And we have to make sure that the ways in which we've been in negotiation with this world right now, a shift must occur for us to continue to be in existence.
Marc, the Anthropocene, humans, who are we to the Anthropocene?
So you used a really good term earlier, kind of surviving in the face of adversity. And like the question becomes, are we going to survive or are we going to thrive? And kind of Ayana used a kind of a term there, like the story. What is our story going to be? What is our story going forwards? And we have so many story chapters in our history, some good, some bad. Like the story of the human race is littered with feats, these amazing feats of exploration and greatness, but also littered by periods of adversity in so many different ways. And like we've looked at the last year of this new evolution of a virus that swept through our planet and that managed to go and adapt, create subvariants in and of itself, and really bring our entire world to a standstill. And like we've done so much over so long in eradicating disease and new advances in medicine, and yet nature always finds a way. Nature found a way to develop a new virus that adapted to go and bring us to a standstill. And the question becomes, not only as a species do we learn, not only as a species can we introspectively look at ourselves, how we treat this planet, what we do, how we look after ourselves, how we look after each other, but really looking forwards, who do we want to be? What is our story going to be going forwards? And like there's so many instances of throughout history of disease process that have wiped millions off the face of the planet. We should never be so arrogant to think that, number one, we're the only species that lives on this planet, that we are going to be here forever. And can we go and can we make these changes now that will allow and ensure that we do thrive going forwards? And we use these vehicles as we push further into the reaches of kind of outer space, as we push further into the depths of our own oceans, as we dig into the soil to go and explore our story from the past and explore these pieces that we don't necessarily fully understand. There's still parts of our own past and our own history that we don't know about. Will those pieces and those lessons actually shape our story going forwards? And as a species, will we learn from those mistakes and make sure that we do thrive going forwards and we do have a story to tell for the next 100, 1,000, whatever number of years that is going forward?
And Binbin, the Anthropocene and humans, and who are we to such an era?
I remember there was some saying like, when you're in primary school, you do not know a lot. And when you go into middle school and high school, you think you know everything. And when you get into college and then you become expert in some area, you suddenly be more modest and knowing like there's a lot you do not know. So I think right now humans are graduating from their high school and getting to the college. And as we have more skills, more techniques, and more understanding of the nature of the space, we actually know there's a lot more out there. So I think the attitudes will become more modest for human as a species, as what Marc just mentioned. And also, I think it is really important to understand things like people are thinking two ways. One is we're like stick with the earth. So we have to find a way to be in balance with the nature. And the other things, humans can find another planet to live. So what we need to do is to have good technologies, put us into a spaceship and find another planet. But I think if we can find good way with the earth, and then we can find better way with other planet. If we destroy the earth can come back. We find another planet, we'll do it all over again. So we're basically chased by a planet, by another planet, and we'll always be on a run. So I think we have to realize we need to think what is the right way to go. And also, I think one important thing is who we are. And as we are losing species biodiversity, I think what is more worried for me is we're losing culture diversity. And actually, a lot of culture diversity is they have long understanding of what the environment is around them. So they have found a relatively good way to live with the nature. But with globalization, with the value system changing, and a lot of people are not proud of their own culture and they're trying to just learn from the outside. So I think what is more important in this era is to let people to be proud of their own culture and also make use of the culture, and then to cherish this and also keep it going while it's thriving. So I think that is really important for all of us who we are in the new year.
I guess I want to close with this idea of a personal thing, of what you personally, what you hope to be, and what you hope we explorers can be to these communities, to the people, to the students, to the others who we touch through our work. And I'll start with Marc.
There's an old Latin phrase that says ad astra per aspera, a rough road leads to the stars. And talking to students, talking to young people, there seems to be a culture nowadays of it's too hard. I can't do that. It's too much work. And trying to convey that message of excitement, that message of enthusiasm, that message of diligence, that there is no such thing as luck. There is no such thing as can't, only won't. And making sure that people understand that these voyages, these expeditions, these journeys of exploration didn't happen by themselves. They were fundamentally rooted by incredible explorers. And one of the biggest things is, I often tell people, we as a species, I think, are hardwired to explore, to find, to ask those questions. And I think once we stop asking those questions, if we ever do, we become stagnant as a species. We lose that spark. And looking forwards someday, being a part of this amazing body, this amazing organization, to work alongside these incredible women and these other explorers, to be able to go and convey that message of inspiration to students, to people, and to ensure that they see these voyages and these expeditions of exploration as that vehicle that should give them an insight into who they are, who we are, where we've come from, and what our journey looks like going forwards. And I'd often tell people, like, what I really want written on the stone the day that I kind of bite the bullet is, he left the world a little bit better than when he found it. And that could be through kind of exploration in medicine or exploration underwater, to be able to make some kind of contribution to our knowledge base, to this organization, to be a part of that kind of great tribe of explorers. That's my passion. That's my drive. And if I can go and convey that, communicate that, we talk about communication and having that voice, to be able to go and feed that small piece of excitement, either to somebody else that wants to explore, or to be able to go and convey some of that journey to somebody that may never get to experience that. I think that is really one of my core essences of what drives me forwards, and make sure that I don't become stagnant.
And Binbin, what is it that you hope to be to communities, students, the young people who see you through your work?
Yeah, I think a lot of young people and students, they contact me, they think, oh, what you're doing is really interesting and I really love what you do. Or they just say, I'm so passionate about nature conservation, about wildlife, what should I do? After working with some of them, I began to think how to be a better person to them. And I think not just giving opportunities to help them to get in touch with what we're doing, but also to show them, first, passion is really important. You need to find what your true love is. So for us, it's really, they do not do it because they love it. So if young people can find their love and actually do it, and as a job, that would be really good, because everyone can be fully motivated to do it. However, the second thing is passion is not enough. You really need to work hard and to be an expert in your area, because a lot of people are curious, they're passionate, but they do not effort to make it happen. And this is very important. So that is what I'm trying to motivate myself every day, is I will have different goals. And as what Marc has mentioned, I do not want to be stagnant. So when I mention the goal, I will always speak out about these goals and how I trying to accomplish every step. So to showing people actually making goals is easy, but you need to make every effort to make it happen. And when you make small things happening, and then that will be really, really encouraging for yourself. You say, oh, I finished something, and then I can move on to the next. So I think passion and working hard is really important. And I still want myself to be a person, even like 80s or 90s. In my age, I still have new goals and I can still work hard towards that goal instead of just sitting in the chair and saying to others, okay, here's my goal, you help me to finish that.
And Ayana.
When I think about who I want to be for communities and for youth, I think about wanting to be in service of them, wanting to be in service of, when I think about being in service of youth, I think about being in service of our future, right? So Ken Stewart, who's one of the co-founders of Diving with a Purpose, all of his signatures in his email are tagged with this phrase, the problems of today won't be solved by the people who created them. A real investment in understanding that when we train our youth, we're training and investing in our future. And so many of us might find that the folks that we are in service to are our institutions or who's giving us money, or this like ambiguous sort of quest for knowledge, but it's like, what are you actually rooted in, right? So being in service of communities, being in service of our youth, being in service of our future, I think is what really grounds me in the understanding of what and how this work is important right now. So that's what I want to continue doing, is really following in that mission, that DWP, that SBA.
Well, thank you. This is really a fantastic session with fantastic, eloquent, really insightful answers from everybody. Been a complete delight to talk to you all. I want to thank you all, not only for the time you spent with us, but of course, for all the incredible work that you do around the planet and all the enterprises that you are engaged with, and for the value, of course, that you bring to us, the Explorers Club, in making us hopefully a richer and more vibrant and more diverse in thinking, more capable organization as we reach out and include and converse and stir and mix these ideas towards making something in the future that is itself a kind of exploration and adventure. Thank you.
How terrific was that? Unfortunately, every great story and expedition has to come to an end, but it doesn't have to come to an end for you, because we have a next installment of the Explorers Club 50 speaker series. I'll see you then.